This is Erica McClure, and we're going to be talking about classrooms, but more specifically, we're going to talk about coaching people to use effective practices in classrooms, which is harder than doing it ourselves. So we've been collecting a lot of data in a lot of schools. We go into classrooms and we watch what teachers do, and we pick a kid at random and we watch what that kid does. So we can answer lots of questions about what is the average kid getting from a teacher? What is the average teacher doing? And how do they deliver that to students? And does it vary by student? So when we go in, we code demographics of the teacher and the student we're looking at. After doing this, we've now done about 13,000 observations. We know these things. If the kid we're looking at is a kid that somebody once upon a time during that year said, that kid's kind of a problem, that kid will get less instruction from the teachers we're watching teach that kid. Once a kid has the label, even if it's not official, of problem, teachers tend to avoid them and they get less engaged time. They also tend to get more negative feedback. Second, black males. In our data, which we have published on this, black males will receive more negative interactions from teachers regardless of their behavior. And I'll show you in a second, you don't even need to control for behavior because they're not different. But that's what we see. And it doesn't matter what the gender or ethnicity of the teacher is, you see the same effect. Third, any kid with disabilities will get less instruction and is more likely to be suspended. So, what's going on here? I think we all know this implicit bias thing. If you believe someone's more likely to have a problem, then they are more likely to have a problem. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the way I think about this is, when I was a teacher and I taught in self-contained rooms and in a lockdown setting, my thought was always, you got to keep an eye on these kids so that if they have a problem, you can nip it in the bud. That's what we were always told. Nip it in the bud. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for kids that I think are going to have problems. And this is where my bias comes in. And let's just say for the record, bias is normal. If you're a human, you've got bias. So I'd like to be able to think about what those are, but I also think we need to turn around the way we use those. I always say this when I talk in front of a group of teachers, because right before I talk to them, the principal says, put your phones away. And I always think, if I were to watch any one of you teachers for the whole time I'm talking and just keep my eyes on you, if you even glanced at your phone, I'm going to nail you. I would nail any one of you who's in this room. And that's the same with kids. So if I'm thinking, and it doesn't matter if my bias is valid, let's say I think anybody wearing a blue shirt is going to have problems. That may or may not be valid. It doesn't matter. I need to use my bias for the positive. So here comes a kid with a blue shirt. As soon as that bell goes off in my head, problem, that should be a signal for me not to watch that kid, but to think, what could I do right now that would increase the probability of that kid doing something that will allow me to say, good, thank you. Use that bias to turn it around. I don't think you're going to get rid of implicit bias, but we can use it to our advantage if we think about it right. This is data from 1,600 1,600 observations. Elementary, middle school, high school. Disruptive behavior rates for white and non-white, student off-task rates for white and non-white, and active engagement rates for white and non-white. If they're not identical, they're statistically indistinguishable. And this is what we keep finding. We do a lot of work with disproportional schools, and what they always say to me is, well, those kids are suspended more because they have more problems. That's just simply not what we see. Almost ever. What we see is behaviors kind of the same, reactions very different. And so a lot of what we end up doing when we work with schools is thinking about, how do we talk to them about how you interact with kids? Everybody in here knows that relationships are important. And because we're talking about coaching teachers, Everybody in here knows there are some adults that can't have positive relationships with kids. It's not in their DNA, or they just don't want to, or whatever. But this is something we do know. The more times a kid is successful with something in school and a teacher says, good for you, you did that, the more they report liking that teacher. So, good instruction, good management practices, the things that set kids up to be successful have a relationship builder in them. Now, of course, if you could do all that and like kids at the same time, it would work even better. But there are people that don't and can't. And our coaching, I think, is doomed if all your coaching is how to be nice. Because some people, if they aren't already doing that, I think there's a chance that that's not going to be something they'll ever be able to do. But setting kids up for success and telling them they're successful is a far more concrete thing that we can teach and we can coach. So, we know these things. Teachers play a huge role in that. Every single time an adult and a student have an interaction that ends up not negative, doesn't have to be super happy party, it's just we had an interaction and it was neutral or positive, is a predictor for more of those and a predictor for higher achievement. That's Bob Pianta's research. We know that those relationships are important and that the more times we engage that ends well, the better. So again, we're not looking for big happy party. We just need that interaction to be good. And again, where we coach adults, a lot of times they'll say, I'd love to have a positive interaction with that kid, but they won't interact positively. And I look at that like a teaching problem. I'd love for that kid to say 2 + 2 = 4, but they say 5. Then you're going to have to do something different. They aren't going to self-correct. And that's, I think, Bob Pianta's quote here is one of my favorites. I feel like this should be a pledge that every teacher should have to sign before they become a teacher. But the asymmetry in child-adult relationship systems places a disproportionate amount of the responsibility on the adult. Again, I feel like everybody who's going to work in a school should have to sign that and say, if it's not working, I'm going to have to do something different. It isn't going to self-correct. That's why I'm the adult in that situation. But negative climate is pervasive, even in schools that are PBIS schools. That sign on the right is one of these random things I found on the internet. I don't know where that came from. But I think it's equally as ridiculous as this sign that I see in schools all the time. It doesn't tell you what to do. If you don't know what to do, it isn't helpful at all. Every kid in your school, be realistic, every kid in your school knows they're not supposed to hit somebody. Why do they do it? It works. What would be a better way? That's what this sign should be about, and that's what we should be teaching. And that's another part of this climate thing, is getting adults to think, how do you interact with kids? And when you do, instead of saying don't, how could you turn the conversation into do? So this is some more data from schools. This is common area coding, we call this. We walk into schools and we watch what the adult in the area is doing. So hallway, cafeteria, entryway, lockers, playground, bus stop, etc. The red bar is what percentage of the time we watched that adult in the common area was the adult looking at kids. So it's 95% around. This is good. The green bar is what percentage of that time were they talking to kids. At elementary, it's 17. At middle, it's 11. And at high school, it's 2. Now, I'm not saying that's bad. What I'm saying is it's a lost opportunity. If we know that me and you having an interaction that doesn't end negative is a predictor for better things, then all of this time I'm not talking to kids at all is an opportunity lost. And that's what we're trying to get schools to think about. But it's not just in common areas. As Eric is going to talk about, we have to think about how adults just interact with kids that they see in their room and do these things. And again, it's not a matter of, I love you all day and big hugs. It's just having interactions. So if we only call it an interaction if it lasts longer than 5 seconds. If it lasts less than 5 seconds, it's coded as positive, negative, or neutral. very few neutral. These are the ratios, positive to negative in common areas. This represents, again, about 1,600 observations. The average elementary school kid, or we'll say teacher, the average elementary school adult says something positive every 5.8 minutes and something negative every 1.8 minutes. It grows until at high school, positive is every 4.3 minutes and negative is every 23 seconds. If you're a kid walking in the hall, being in the locker area, going to the cafeteria at a high school, what's the climate? That's the climate. And that's part of what we're up against. Now, when I give this data back to those high schools especially, this is what they say. Well, those kids never do anything right. I have two responses to that. One is, yes, they do. The vast majority were walking quietly. You were looking at the ones that weren't, which you have to do, but there were lots of chances to say, thanks, how's it going, to a lot of those other kids. My second response is, if that's true, then you need to do a lot more than we're talking about. You've got a lot of instruction to do. If nobody in your school ever does the right thing, you need an even bigger intervention. So then when I put it that way, they're like, well, yeah, okay. This is data on just feedback rates in classrooms. This is from a big observation set. So this is 6,700 elementary classrooms that we've looked at. Unique teachers, unique students. These are rates per minute of positive, negative, and what we call correction. Correction needs to say something about reteaching. What would be a better way? Could you show me that? We see one correction from an adult in every 13 schools we go to. That's how infrequent it is that an adult will say corrective things instead of don't. Notice how low these are, but how low they go. Even though we don't do it a lot in elementary, it looks high compared to how little we do it as they get older. And as us in PBIS know, we would like to see the average kid get 4 times more successes than failures. Well, this is the average, not including kids that need more than 4 to 1. And again, at high school, it's 1 to 1. That is not predictive of something being better in the future. So here's what we've been doing. We did a focus group with a set of teachers, and we asked them, what are the behaviors that bug you? What are the behaviors that you would say, I can't be positive because of these? And they gave us 5. We've actually grown that to a few more. I just want to show you a couple of them to show you what we're doing. So first, provocative behaviors was one. Kids that just do stuff to make us say, oh my God. My first response to that is never say, oh my God, when a kid says something. You need to be bored when they do something outrageous, so you're not reinforcing it. But the first thing we talk about is teach what you want them to do. So before we ever talk about provocative, let's talk about what kind of things they might do and what could you teach and where should you stand and what could you say when they come in the room and how do you arrange the seating to make that less likely. So then what we do is we've been doing this with PLCs. So we bring a PLC together and we talk about provocative behavior and they say how much they hate it. We show them a video that's acted by people pretending to be actors in a school. So here's an example. A kid with a shirt that says something horrible on it. He comes walking in the room, and so I show this to people. I want everybody in that PLC to watch this video, and then we have a discussion. Guys, come on in, take a seat. Nope, dress code violation, not coming in with that shirt on.
But my mom gave it to me.
I don't care who got it for you, it's inappropriate, you're not wearing it here.
Well, if mom says it's okay to wear, then it's none of your business.
It's my business because it's inappropriate. Out.
What's your problem?
You need to leave until you get that shirt fixed because it's against the dress code. We have a rule in this school for dress code. He violated it. This is a black and white case. He should have gone. We do have a rule. He did violate it. So I try to turn this around when we talk with the PLCs, and I give them a bet. I'll give you $1 million if we could rewind time. That kid fixes that problem. stays in the room, gets all of his work done, and so do the other kids. What would you have liked to have seen that teacher do differently if that was the bet? And on every one of these, it's a matter of rewiring what the successful outcome is. Right now, what people are thinking is, if this kid did it wrong, the successful outcome is punishment that's big. And even what people will say when they say it's not working, they'll say it's not working because the principal doesn't punish them enough. What if it was about, instead of the prize being kid leaves, what if the prize was kid fixes it and we move on? Think about changing that. And now we can talk about strategies. And this is what people will say when we show these strategies.
Take a seat.
Sorry. They'll say, that won't work for my kids. I want them to say that because that's what they're thinking. And so we have to go through this. We do a little role plays. We'll work and we talk about this. And I want the person in front of me to go, well, that would be fine with those kids, but my kids, that wouldn't work for. Because then I can say, you're right. Your kids are more unique than any kids in the world. So what would we have to do to tweak that and make it work with your kids? And there's a conversation there now. Well, let's try it that way. Well, let's do this. And we get everybody thinking about it. Then I try to show them one where the teacher did it differently. And I have to tell you and them, because I wrote these, they're going to have a happy ending on the second one. I'm not suggesting that that means anybody who does it this way, it'll work. But it certainly is a probability. And again, betting your own money, if you were betting your own money, you'd rather have me do it the second way than the first way because it gives you a better chance of the prize. And the prize isn't money. The prize is kid stays in the room, does what they're supposed to do, gets their work done, etc.
Have a seat. Thank you. Hey, Stephen, hang on there a second. I want to talk to you. Come on in, guys. Have a seat. You know what to do. Come on in. Welcome. Thanks, guys. Come on in. Hey, you know, that shirt is really pretty inappropriate. I don't think you're going to make it through the day. You're going to end up getting in trouble if you wear that shirt.
My mom got it for me. So.
That's even more of a reason why you wouldn't want to lose that shirt, right? Because if you wear it through the day, you are going to get in trouble. See, the thing is, because it's so inappropriate to get in dress code, if I were to have to see you wearing it out here, I'm going to have to go tell the principal. I don't think it's that big a deal. I don't want you to get in trouble for it, but it's up to you. So I'll tell you what we could do. You could come in here. I've got another shirt I could have you wear, or I can give you a pass to go to PE to get another shirt. But you're going to have to make a choice of how to fix this.
I'll just take your shirt.
I think that's a good choice for you. Come on in. I'll get it for you.
Now, what if he says, screw you, I'm wearing this shirt? Then you say, well, I think that was a bad choice for you, but all right. I'm not going to take responsibility for you making that decision. And on that first video, I did. Oh, no, I'm not going to. I'm taking responsibility for that. What I'm saying is, you know that's against the rules. You have a choice to make. I'm the teacher. My job is to help you make good choices. Here's some things you could do that would be good choices. If you choose not to do those, then you chose the consequence. I'm going to go on teaching and we're going to do this. I'm not going to let your provocative behavior drag me down with you. But this seems to be one of the hardest things to coach adults through is how do you remain being an adult in this situation? Not letting kids drag you with them. And again, I think it's this reprogramming of we just got to keep thinking, what's the successful outcome? Kid success is the successful outcome. And that doesn't mean you're going to get it, but we do have control of probabilities with that. So the next thing we really want to talk about is, what do we do when kids do it right? So we're at a PBIS conference, and we always talk about all kinds of things for reinforcement. This is, to me, what reinforcement is in a school. Another sign I found on the internet that I don't really know where it came from. To me, everything we do with kids in a school, this should be what we call reinforcement. Hey, good job. If every adult in the schools did that, you would not need any of the other things. The reason we need lots of things like tickets and tokens is because adults don't say things verbally. Even the ticket and token could be useful to give me a reason to interact. Hey, you did a good job, but I watch schools that use tickets and they go like this. It's completely violating the whole idea of positive engagement. That's what that reinforcement is for. It's more of the positive engagement that predicts future positive engagement. But we as adults aren't very good at that. So, getting ready to think about the coaching part that Erica's going to describe in detail from her kind of daily work kind of thing. This is something that I think is really important and people need to realize. That giving a lecture to somebody about doing these things, as I'm doing right now, does not change anybody's behavior. What we know is it might make them slightly more aware, but it doesn't change what happens when they get back to their job. And you can say the same thing for having a video. You can say the same thing for role playing. All of those things might be necessary, but the only thing that really changes behavior back in the classroom is coaching. Again, if this worked, somebody could make a video saying, hey teachers, do this, and everything would work. It doesn't work unless we keep up with them. And I like to think about this like effective instruction. Same with kids. You don't just say it and that's it. You say it, you engage with them. You practice and guide them through practice, and you give them formative feedback. Effective instruction. When we talk about coaching in a school, we're talking about effective instruction for adults. Same idea. So when we're coaching, these are things to think about. If we don't set people up to do things in a way that works, it burns people out. Those of us in special ed, or especially those of us who work with kids with behavior disorders, have seen the teacher that stays for a month, leaves the keys on the desk and walks out, and then another teacher comes in, and that happens 2 or 3 times a year. If we don't give people the skills, coach them through to be able to be successful, it's not going to work. And it's the same thing, the logic is the same as it would be for kids. Without effective instruction and without effective practices to set you up to be successful, the probability of your success goes down dramatically. So this is some of the kind of things we've been doing. We start with the PLC. And we train the PLC on whatever skill it might be, how to deal with kids that are non-compliant, how to deal with, they get to decide what they'd like to focus on. Then what we do is we give them, each PLC, an iPad. And we put a little coding system on there, a real simple one. And we say, at the end of the PLC, I want you all to choose a person you're going to have observe you. And so we'll just all switch off. Come observe me tomorrow. You've got some free time, come observe me, and you're going to tell me how often I did whatever thing we're counting. How many positive statements did you make to kids? How many times did you ask the kids to be engaged in a positive way? How many times, what would you like us to focus on? And what we do is, once a month, there's a data point. Now, what I refer to this as is formative feedback, just like we would want to see if we're teaching kids. And then we let the school as a school plot their data. You've got your own data, if you're a teacher, but we're now taking it as a school and looking at big ideas. Where are we as a school in terms of positive and negative feedback? And what we find is that the only time we can really get movement as a school is when we have coaching at the teacher level. Now, the hard part is not everybody in that PLC really knows how to coach. Just getting feedback won't be enough. And that's why we want to think about adults in terms of PBIS. Your adults are going to fill out a triangle like your kids do. Most of them are going to be fine with the stuff we're doing. Some need a little extra tweak, and some need a lot of support. And that's where Erica comes in. Erica is going to talk about what she does, or did, because she's now a full-time doctoral student, but last year she was in the trenches, and so she's going to talk about kind of the daily way she coached under that PBIS model.
Good morning. Okay. My name's Erica McClure, and I just want to tell you a little bit about myself and my experience in education so you can know a little bit more about me. I don't have the name that Dr. Scott has in this field, so probably need a little bit more introduction of me. And I also want to tell you a little bit of why I do the work that I do before I dive in to this particular work that I did with a specific school. So I've spent 12 years in special education. The first 6 years of my career, I was in a self-contained classroom in an alternative high school. After I left that alternative high school, I went to a middle school resource classroom, spent some time there before transitioning briefly to a high school, and then I moved into a district-wide behavior consultant position. I was the only behavior consultant in an entire district. After that, I left and became an academic instructional coach in a school identified as failing by the state for test scores. I'm now a full-time doc student, so I either hate myself or I'm a glutton for punishment. But there's a reason I do this kind of work, and it's because I'm very, very passionate about creating positive experiences for students. Students legally have to go to school. We make them because we know it's something that they need in order to be successful throughout their life, right? And so a lot of students every day go to school and hate it. They dread it. And so for me, I thought no student should be forced to do something that they hate or dread if we can prevent it, if we can do something to create this positive environment for students. So that's a lot of the reason why I do what I do. And I can tell you guys a particular story that kind of, for me, encapsulates why I'm passionate about this work. So while I was a behavior consultant, a lot of times I would get phone calls from schools, kids in crisis, lots of aggression, right? Lots of negative, disruptive behaviors. One particular school I was called in because there was a kindergarten teacher who was 8 months pregnant. She was about to burst. I felt really bad for her while I was there working with all these kindergartners. And there was one in particular in her class that they said they were becoming increasingly concerned because of his possible physical aggression. So I come in prepared to see what I've seen in lots of environments. I come in and see a student using a work system they had established for him and using it correctly. And I point this out to the teacher almost right away and she dismisses it. Oh, just wait, that's nothing. No. So the students are now supposed to go to their seats, sit down, and start drawing a picture of their family pets. So this is kindergarten, so you can imagine as she's asking for examples, it goes from cats and dogs to lions and tigers, and my favorite animal is a giraffe, right? We're beyond pets now. So this student sitting at his desk, trying to do his work, pencil in hand, notebook open, starts drawing a picture of a lion. And the teacher coming by, checking in all the students, what do you think she says to him? Gosh, you guys are with me. You're ahead of the story. Exactly. She's like, what are you drawing? That's not a pet. And he's like, my favorite animal is lion. It's not what you're supposed to be drawing. So then a short while later, all the students are being called to the rug in pairs or in groups of 3, I think. And they're going to share their drawings with the other students. Sorry, this is heartbreaking. I watched this kid get up with his notebook, stand up and looking at the teacher push in his chair. She doesn't notice. He goes over to the rug, sits down. In his group, looks up at the teacher. She doesn't notice. He's opening his notebook. He's flipping through, trying to find the picture of the lion so we can share it with his peers. Oh, she finally notices him. She comes over. She leans down and says, what are you doing? Why aren't you sharing with your peers? And he tells her he's trying to find his picture. She takes the notebook out of his hand and starts ripping pages out of it. You guys, I am not making this up. She's ripping pages out of it. She finds the picture of the lion, rips it out, drops it in his lap, and tells him to share with his peers. She's the whole time telling him, your notebook's wrong, you put this in the wrong order, it was supposed to be the next page, and she starts stapling it. This kid is sitting there staring at the piece of paper in his lap, completely defeated. And then, sorry, I wish the story ended there. I mean, I want a positive ending for this story. She turns to him and says, why aren't you sharing? You two go share. Obviously, he's not going to share. He's just going to have to sit here by himself. Before I left that day, that student was in tears. And I drove back to central office. I found my boss, and I just let it out. I vented at him. And I went back and I found the principal and I spoke with the principal. But that is a lot of the reason why I do the work that I do. Because when I go in and see things like that, as much empathy as I want to have for this poor 8-month pregnant teacher who's dealing with kindergartners all day, who I'm sure has had several interactions with this student that were positive and several that were negative. Seeing those interactions that one day, that was something I had to work to prevent. So that's what I did. And a lot of my work was going into these situations and trying to ensure that as much as I possibly could, I could give teachers the tools to create these positive environments for these students. I don't have a positive ending to that story with that particular teacher, but I do have others that I could share. So I was a district-wide behavior consultant in a suburban district with 23 schools. I was the only one in the county. And again, a lot of times I would get phone calls or emails from principals asking me to come in. There was one particular elementary school that asked me to come to their PLC meetings one day, and they wanted me to discuss behavior supports in this PLC with their teachers. So I'm thinking I'm gonna walk in and just talk about general supports that you want to put in place for a classroom. I left with a list of over 50 students who, according to these teachers, were in crisis. These students needed support immediately. And at one point during the meeting, one of them paused and I said, "You can keep going." And she said, "Whoa, wait, we can give you more? We were told we could only bring 3 students each." And she kept going. So to me, at this moment, I am thinking, what's going on when over 10% of the population of this school is in crisis to the point that they need me immediately? I'm thinking, these aren't kids in crisis, this is a school in crisis, right? They need me, but it's not so much the kids, it's more the school itself, right? So at this point, I had a lot of teacher anecdotal information, which is useful and valuable, but I needed to go get more. So one of the first things that I did, and one of the first things I want to show you guys, even though I did have some awareness of the county and the school because I had been working there for a while, I did look at the school demographics. It is a suburban school. It has a mostly white population. But if you look at socioeconomic, almost 3/4 of the school has free or reduced lunch. And as Dr. Scott mentioned earlier, this led to a certain amount of bias when it came to the teachers. To be honest, when the students walked through the door, if they presented in a certain way or said certain things, talked about certain things, the teachers automatically expected certain behaviors from those students. So a lot of the conversations might be like, well, this kid, blank, their parents, blank. There's a lot of time spent admiring the problem rather than coming up with solutions. So this led to a lot of bias present in this school, which unfortunately we had to work to combat. So I did not just want to have the teacher anecdotal information. Even though it's helpful, I needed a lot more. I'm very holistic when it comes to data collection. So I immediately went back to central office and I spoke with our Safe Schools coordinator for the district. She oversees implementation of PBIS in the district, and she was sort of the gatekeeper of all of the PBIS walkthrough information. That data was very useful to me, so I wanted to get that from her. I also talked with Susan Robertson. She works out of the University of Louisville with ABRE, which is Academic and Behavioral Response to Intervention. She was the school liaison. I contacted her next because if she is the person helping to implement and put in place behavioral supports in the building, I wanted to know her perspective and any data that she may have as well. I'm looking at the data. I saw something similar to what Dr. Scott discussed earlier. It was about a 3-to-1 ratio. 3 negative statements for every 1 positive. When we looked at the scripting that had been done as part of the PBIS walkthroughs, a lot of the positive statements were very generic. Were not specific at all, so it would be things like, good job, well done, right? And a lot of the negative feedback was, don't do that. So these students weren't being clearly told what they should be doing, which was kind of like a light bulb going off in my head. This will help me out a lot. So I also spoke with the special education consultant for the building and the school psychologist and the director of special education. These are people who had been working with the building and had a sense of where the building was in its provision of services to students who had been identified, but also because they were part of the RTI process, they had some understanding of the different tiers of behavior interventions that were already present in the building. And then I wanted to see it for myself. I had already spent quite a bit of time in this building in an EBD self-contained classroom, observing and supporting that teacher, but I started to branch out and go into other classrooms to see what I could find. I also spoke with the principal, the counselor, and the instructional coach, again, just to see what their concerns were as well. And so beyond that, I came up with this idea. It was a little crazy, but I also really liked it because here was my chance, right, to work with these teachers to create an entire school-wide positive environment for these students. So we called it the BEST, and we came up with that acronym based on the school name. So no, it is not related to the behavior curriculum that is out there. It was just something we came up with. I've seen it everywhere since then, but it actually is the name of the elementary school, and then Success Team is where we came up with that acronym. I wanted to make sure that on this committee, we had our BEST committee, that we included district level people and school level people. Because I was a district level employee, a lot of people at the district level had a big say in what I did with my time. And in order for me to be able to spend a lot of time doing this, I had to sell it to them. And the more buy-in I got at a higher level, the more support I would get for this work. So I included the director of Safe Schools. I included the special education consultant, the director of special education, the director of elementary schools, and she actually helped me design the cohort based on a thinking strategies cohort she had in place in the district. And then I also definitely wanted to keep the building level administrative staff involved. So we developed this tiered staff support plan. We looked at the PBIS walkthrough data, the classroom observations that I had conducted, but we also used some that they had done internally as well. We looked back at the anecdotal teacher report during PLCs to identify target areas for training. So again, we looked at data we had obtained at the district level, data we obtained at the building level, and then data from the teachers themselves. What were they asking for? What did they think that they need? Because that is definitely important. And then we actually used similar data sources and administrative team to identify additional teachers or teachers for additional tiered support as needed. So we started with tier 1. And this occurred during a staff meeting after school. I provided an hour-long training on research-based best practice instructional strategies. So we talked about these 5 things. Pre-teaching expectations, again, from the PBIS walkthrough data. We had observed that a lot of the comments to students were either generic in their praise or said, don't do this. So a lot of students didn't know what they should be doing. So we talked about the need for pre-teaching expectations. We also talked about the need to provide behavior-specific praise, which was very important. Again, if somehow a student misses it as you're pre-teaching it, you can praise the student near them. They'll pick up on it, they'll hear it. But we also want to recognize students for what they are doing well. We also talked about pre-correction, especially if we know, as Dr. Scott pointed out earlier, if we know that a particular student is going to engage in a behavior, is more likely to engage in a behavior, I should say. We're not psychics, so we don't know for sure they're going to do it. But if we know that they are more likely to engage in that behavior, then we want to offer some kind of pre-correction or pre-reminder to cue them to engage in the appropriate desired behavior. We also talked a lot about positive relationship building. Again, that was something that I'm very passionate about, but I also became or have become frustrated by seeing adults engaging negatively with students because, and I've heard a lot of people talk about training students to solicit teacher praise. We're teaching kids to manipulate teachers to praise them. So we're putting the responsibility back on students, which makes me so sad, honestly, because this is something, and sorry, I'm on a pedestal right now, I'm on my stump, I'm gonna preach a little bit, but this is something we should be doing as part of our jobs. It's difficult. If we need timers to prompt us, that's fine, but this is something that we should be doing. We shouldn't be teaching kids to solicit that praise. That is my personal opinion. So we did talk about that, about finding as many opportunities as possible to build those positive relationships, from greeting at the door to embedding it in things like behavior-specific praise. I told them about how I would, especially when I taught in those self-contained rooms, I had students who would be coming in for my math class and they would hate math, and I knew this. And I knew that shortly into the class, these might be the students that I would have to try and get re-engaged, right? And that's where that struggle would begin. I was going to provide them with a trigger shortly into that lesson. So I would try and build them up on their way in the room by greeting them at the door, by talking to them, by relating to them. So I took every opportunity that I could to establish those positive relationships. so that they would respond well to me when I was presenting them with something they hated. So we talked a lot about that. And we also talked about opportunities to respond, which we all know is best practice, keeps kids engaged. We did not see a lot of that. Even at the elementary school classroom, you had some teachers that were rocking it and other teachers that were not. And then we also talked about the inclusion of these antecedent strategies and others in their regular daily classroom plans. So then we moved on to tier 2 identification. This is, we didn't select only teachers that were high in need, because our long-term plan for this project was to train teachers, increase their ability, and then have them serve as leaders, right, throughout the building, so that they could then take this and train other people the following year, work as mentor teachers throughout the building. So I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go back just a little bit to kind of cue myself. During the tier 1 training, I had one teacher whom, as I was presenting, and Dr. Scott mentioned this earlier too, that one teacher that was like, that won't work. That's not going to work on my kids. So I talk about it a little bit more. And then at another point in the presentation, she stops and she starts preaching a little bit herself. The kids that we have here, the kids at our school, you don't know. And as she's talking, I see a couple people around her just nodding her head. And I put a pin in her. I'm like, okay, you're one of mine. And it's so funny. You would think I would be like, oh, no, not her. She's not open to doing this. Why would I pick her? Yes. Wait, say that again, but say it a little louder. That was exactly it. She leads the way. If this is the person that people listen to and nod, can you imagine if I could get her on my side, right? And she can go back and preach, and she can preach to a choir, and then this spreads throughout the building. Oh, I wanted her. Like, even if she was going to be resistant, I was going to get her, and she was going to be on our team. And when I took her to the principal, it was so funny, because at first, I think there was like this split second of her going, what? But then she knew exactly what I was thinking and why. The other nice thing about her is she was also our union rep for the building. Right? I'm glad you guys responded that way, because that was the other thing I was thinking. She was our union rep. And if I could again get her in this program and on board and committed, so yeah, that was a big undertaking, but I took it. we got her on. So when we identified our teachers, when we were sitting down to identify them, we were looking at these 3 areas. And again, someone didn't have to fit the criteria in all 3 areas. They might fit one set of criteria more than another, right? But these were the 3 types of teachers we were looking for when we were selecting teachers. We also wanted to try and get a teacher from each grade level, kindergarten through 5th grade. We also wanted 3 special education teachers and 1 teacher from related arts. Now, we did understand that if we couldn't find teachers that fit this criteria well from each grade level, we would have to compromise, but that was our goal. And we were actually able to do it. We had kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. We had the music teacher and 3 special education teachers as part of our cohort. And we wanted to try and find PLC leads, team department chairs, vocal staff members, and our union representative. That was my 5th grade teacher that I brought in. And also an SBDM member, because again, these are your leaders throughout the building. If they are buying into what you are selling, then they are going to go sell it for you throughout the building, right? Oh, I'm sorry. It's a school-based decision-making committee. So it has representatives. It has parent representatives, teachers, sometimes students, district, community members. Yes. And then also we wanted to include teachers who had either expressed a need for support, or we had noticed through our observations or our data collection process that they were in need of support. So we would look at ODRs. We would also look at the PBIS walkthrough data if there were people who had a low number of opportunities to respond, or we noticed that there was a lot of negative feedback being being provided by those teachers. That would also be a check mark. So we looked for that need for support, and then we also looked at disposition. And again, that one teacher who was a leader, who had expressed, even with her saying that won't work, at the same time was asking for something that would, right? Her disposition wasn't necessarily there, but we had a lot of teachers who were very eager to participate. And so we also did look at how people responded to the training, what they had said in those PLC meetings, and if they were, again, asking to be a part of this cohort. So then what we had to do, people were voluntold. So we had to sell this to them. We selected these teachers for a reason, but when the principal sent out the email, she sent me the rough draft first, and the very first word in that email, can you guess what it was? Congratulations! You've been invited to join this amazing cohort. I told her to highlight this as a selling point. You're going to have the district behavior consultants in your classroom once a week. And it's a good thing, I promise. She's going to be there. So we really had to sell our product to these teachers. Even though they were being selected, they were not volunteering. We wanted them to want to participate. And our eventual goal, again, was to build capacity in these selected teachers and eventually have them go and work within their PLCs as mentor teachers and train additional teachers so that this could be a ripple effect throughout the building. And so we presented professional development to this subcommittee at the beginning of the 2017-2018 school year. And then we were going to work with them throughout the entire year. And then we would present it again at the beginning of the next year to the next cohort, and the training would spread. Now, I sometimes, just because of that position, I sometimes would work in a vacuum or in a bubble doing my own job. For this, though, this was a huge undertaking. So I really need to include other people. So I had the special education consultant. I've mentioned a lot of these people already, but the school psychologist, our safe schools coordinator, the principal instructional coach, our school liaison for PBIS, the director of elementary schools and the director of special education were all involved in this planning process. I also actually reached out to an educational cooperative in the state of Kentucky. They work with several districts. They sort of work with these lumps of districts. And I reached out to the behavior consultant in the educational cooperative. He was the one that clued me into selling our product. He gave me a couple of suggestions for how we could have teachers self-monitor. So those were people that were involved in supporting this work. So then one of the things that we asked teachers to do almost immediately was to embed their expectations into their instruction. When we met before the school year even began, we gave them a training that shared with them the PBIS walkthrough data so they could see where we were starting. And then we talked about where they should go from there. So we went a little bit further into best practices. We talked about how you really do not want any more than 5 classroom expectations. 2 to 5 is really all you need. We talked about the need for instruction in those classroom expectations, and then we outlined a schedule for them. We would meet as a cohort every month, and every month that we met, we would discuss how things were going. We would talk about, sort of in general terms, as a group, the observations that had been conducted for that previous month, and then we would really dive into one of the research-based best practice teaching strategies that we wanted them to implement. And then that next month, when we were doing weekly classroom observations, we would come in and look for that in practice. Now, if the entire rest of the time that I was not in their classroom, they would forget to engage in that, but then I would come in and suddenly they would, that's okay, because it was happening. Sometimes if I have to be that cue or that reminder for them to suddenly engage in that practice, that was okay. But this was the work that we did with them before the school year started. On top of weekly observations and meeting as a team monthly for training and check-ins, I also scheduled time to meet with each teacher individually once a month. And during those meetings, we would talk about their specific observation data. We would talk about student-specific concerns. That was sort of the icing on the cake for them honestly, because if they knew that I was coming to address student-specific concerns as well. It's the whole reason they wanted me to come in the first place. And I was happy to do that because I was spending more time in their classroom and I could really speak to what I was seeing. And so that was our outline schedule for the entire year. And so then when we went in the classroom, again, we were looking for those specific practices in action, but we also took some of the data that they were collecting for the PBIS district walkthroughs and included that in our observations as well, because we wanted that data. So this is what a typical observation would look like. I would walk into the classroom. I would do an immediate count of the number of students. I would then do an additional count of the number of students engaged. I would write that on my paper, then I would note the time. For the next 5 minutes, I would track the number of opportunities to respond, whole group and individual. And then I would also track the number of positive feedback and the number of negative feedback that the teacher was providing. And then I would track, let's say the first month I'm tracking behavior-specific praise. I would script the behavior-specific praise that I was seeing and tally each time that I saw it. And so this sounds really, really like a lot of information to track. But when you get in the habit of collecting this data, it becomes pretty easy. And then after 5 minutes, I would do another engagement count. I would continue to track data, scripting. And then at the end of the 10 minutes, I would do one last engagement count and be done. So I spent 10 minutes in each classroom. So typically, my weekly observations took about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Did you get 3 sets of three engagement sweeps in 10 minutes?
I would. So I would do one when I entered, one at 5 minutes, one at 10 minutes. And if again, depending on what we were doing, what I was measuring, I might also be looking at pre-queuing for transitions or pre-queuing. So sometimes if that's the skill I was looking for, that's what I would be noting. And there were times I might go in a classroom and it wouldn't be happening. That was okay. We would talk to the teacher about that. But that's mostly what I was looking for. All right, I kind of talked about this already, but I'll go over it again. I sometimes do that, anticipate my next slide and give all the information in advance. So again, we did meet monthly. One thing I can say, and again, it came in handy to have that union rep in my group, because one thing I ran into almost right away was that teachers, the contract in this county stated that teachers were only required to meet after school or during their planning time 1 time a week. And so if there was another meeting, that was something I ran into almost immediately. I was going to be asking them to meet with me during one additional planning period. So I had to send an email to all the teachers asking for their consent to do that. And luckily they all consented. Otherwise that would have been a problem. And again, I think it helped having the union rep on in my group. So I did have to get consent from them as a group to meet with me during that additional time. It really helped meeting as a cohort, I think, because when we could come together, this was something we could discuss as a group. They could reflect on it as a group. When they were with me individually, I think sometimes it was interesting. They felt a little less free to talk. When they were in front of the group, if someone else expressed a similar concern, they felt like they could jump in. So I felt like both meetings were definitely helpful. When we came together as a cohort, I would also give them an article, possibly, or something additional to read about whatever practice we were discussing that month. A lot of it, I would try and give it to them beforehand, about a week beforehand, so they would have time to read it and we could then discuss it in the group. And then again, I would meet with them individually to discuss any tier 2 or tier 3 students in their classroom to help them identify and implement interventions for those specific students, which was great. They really, really appreciated that. That again was like the selling point for a lot of them. And then we did find professional development that was being provided in the district, and then we found some that was being provided outside of the district by that educational cooperative I mentioned earlier. One was focused on research-based instructional strategies that you could embed to deal with simple behaviors in your classroom. Another one focused on just general classroom management. And we found the money and the time to be able to send members of the cohort to those trainings, which again was really great for them, and they could come back and discuss that with the group. And then we did not actually get to this point. This is what we wanted to do with the next group, or begin implementing later, was we wanted to use self-monitoring tools through the Google Suite, where teachers would report daily I use behavior-specific praise 5 times in this lesson. They would track it themselves, right? And then they would enter it into a Google form, and I would provide positive feedback to the teacher, right? I would provide my own behavior-specific praise to the teacher. We never got to that point, but that was something that was recommended that I really wish we would have been able to do. So out of our 10 teachers, there were 2. One of them was the teacher who was a little resistant at first. Quite a bit resistant in the first training. The other one was a special education teacher who worked with EBD students in a self-contained classroom. Those were the 2 teachers we ended up identifying as being in need of Tier 3 supports. These teachers, we didn't see a lot of positive changes in their opportunities to respond. They were also continuing to write a lot of office disciplinary referrals for students. One of the teachers, it was this one particular student. And so in order to really focus on those 2 teachers, we increased the level of support, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But we also noticed there wasn't a lot of implementation of the strategy, which we weren't sure if that was because of a lack of understanding of how to implement it. That's sort of how we proceeded. One of the teachers did request additional assistance during the one-on-one. That was the self-contained resource teacher. And then I did talk with the principal, and she asked for me to provide additional support to the 5th grade teacher that was struggling. And so, again, it wasn't just, if I just had a principal coming to me saying, I think this teacher needs more help, and I had data that was contradicting that, I would present that data to her. But really, looking at the data with her request, it made sense that this teacher needed additional support. So for those 2 teachers, we actually set goals, right? We got very specific on what we wanted to see in their classrooms. And then we did have them engage in some self-monitoring and consistent positive feedback. I started observing in these teachers' classrooms multiple times a week. For one, it was 2. For the self-contained EBD teacher, it was a little more frequent. But we talked a lot about when you're using these strategies, what are you seeing? Really encouraging self-reflection, because I can point out everything that I'm seeing, and it may mean much less to them than if they're drawing their own conclusions. So we did a lot of self-reflection. And then I did meet with them. Instead of meeting with them monthly, I did meet with them weekly to discuss their progress and the data that we were seeing. And a lot of that was reflection over the data. And then we looked at a lot of different types of data, including their self-report, what I was seeing in my observations. We looked at their opportunities to respond, the office disciplinary referrals, any PBIS walkthroughs that had been done. And so a lot, again, when we got to that higher level, a lot of what we did was intensify the other supports as well. So I would work with them to conduct informal functional behavior assessments on students. That 5th grade teacher with that one student in particular, we worked a lot at conducting an informal FBA with that student. We really tried to make these interventions student-specific. And one teacher, I recommended training in FBAs utilizing online modules. There are some out of IRIS, right? And then there's basicfba.com. Those are both really good online sources if anyone's looking for any. And then again, we increased the frequency in observations and feedback. And one thing that I did do for the self-contained EBD teacher, I spent time in her classroom modeling specific strategies, which helped her out quite a bit. Once she saw these strategies modeled for her a few times, she was able to implement them. And then with the 5th grade teacher, we actually found time for her to go observe another teacher in the building so that she could see how this teacher was implementing those same practices. Yeah? I do not in this PowerPoint, but if you email me, I can send it to you. For sure. The tool itself that we use to capture it, yes. If anyone wants that, my email will be at the end. If you email me, I can send that tool to you. Absolutely. Yes? Oh, that is such a good question. I didn't clarify that at all. I modeled in her classroom. So I came in separate from our meeting. So when we were in a meeting, we might identify an intervention or a strategy, and then I would go in and observe her doing it, and if it did not go well, then I would offer to model, and I would come in and model it for her, and then we would meet and she would discuss what she saw, and then I would come in and observe her doing it again. So these were essential features for this plan. I had to have district and building level support. Again, I was a district level employee, so I had district level people dictating what I was doing. I also knew that people are pulled from schools frequently for district level trainings and district level meetings. And I had to have district level people behind me so that I could go to them and say, you can't have these people. I'm so sorry. I need them for my meeting. And this is why. So that's, again, why from almost the very beginning, I went to these people at the district level to get their support for the project and to get their buy-in and input. I also definitely needed building level support. And again, one of the first people I went to in the building, I went to the principal and I went to the school counselor. Because if they were not supportive of this project, then the same thing may happen. Oh, I'm gonna need these people for a meeting. We're gonna cancel that meeting today. Everybody wants fall break. We're gonna go to fall break early. And then the other thing that I needed, and I had to assess this through the training and through my conversations with staff in the building, there had to be a desire and readiness for change. If the building did not want to change, then I was going to be running headfirst into a brick wall, which does not sound like fun, right? I don't want to keep meeting walls of resistance. If people were willing to change and willing to do the work required to cause and effect change, then I was ready to be there for them, and they were. I also needed to identify the target areas. If I walked in blind without looking at data first, I would be prescripting what I thought this school needed. And again, I'm going to get up on my stump for just a little bit. Too many times, people go into communities or schools in need and say, here, I've got what you need for you. Here you go. And the people in the building may want support, may want change, but you may not be giving them what they need, right? Or they're less likely to accept possibly what you're giving because they had no say in it, right? So I had to make sure before I walked in here with any plan that I knew what this school needed. So that's why I went again back to the district level and looked at our PBIS walkthrough data. I looked at Swiss data, and I spoke with people within the building and at the district level to get their overall perception of where this school was struggling. I also had to have fidelity in coaching. I had to prioritize the work I was doing at this school for myself. And I also had to have my boss's support in that, because if I got an email or a call from a school saying this kid just punched this teacher and he's tearing up this room, and I say, I'm meeting with my cohorts, I'll be there in a moment, that would be okay. And I had to be okay with making that level of commitment. Again, I also had to give them a lot of my time. Typically, I spent 1 day per week in the building when it came to working with some of the tier 3 teachers that often spread into additional half day or an additional full day, which was a lot of time when I have that big of a district. So I really had to, the rest of my time, right? I had to make sure that I scheduled it very, very wisely. I also needed access to specific resources. This included specialists. We did bring in the behavior consultant from the educational cooperative to provide training to teachers in the building. We also had to have money for materials that I could use for training, money for outside PD. So all of those things were necessary in order to implement this. So this, again, is why I got a lot of approval from a variety of people so that everyone could be committed. Anybody ever had this happen? Right? So I had this beautiful, well-laid plan, right? And it was going to be smooth sailing the whole way. This was the first teacher workday in our district, where I was told that 3 special education teachers that were part of my cohort were being pulled for district level training. No ifs, ands, or buts. They were gone. I was going to have to make that up with them. This was when I showed up to do one after-school meeting, and I kind of joked about this earlier, but it actually happened, where the principal canceled the meeting. She said, I don't think anyone really wants to meet on the today, so we canceled the meeting and they're going home. Okay. This was when partway through the year, the principal actually left the building and did not return. And this, sad to say, was when I left the district for another job. Not because of this, but I should say it wasn't this that drove me over the edge, but I promise. But I ended up actually leaving the district for a different position. So reflecting back on this entire process, we did make positive gains, especially with some of the newer teachers who had not been in the field very long. This, in particular, the second grade teacher, the third grade teacher, and the kindergarten teacher. We saw a significant increase in their use of the practices, especially behavior-specific praise and OTRs. We saw go way up. A lot more positive feedback. But here's really, if I were to do this process again, these are things that I would absolutely ensure were in place. I unintentionally made myself like the center of this plan. I was the one going and doing all of the observations, collecting the data. I did a lot of the trainings and the meetings because I knew that I was committed to the project. And to be honest, at first I was a little concerned that if I pulled someone else in, that they wouldn't be as committed. But the fault lied in the fact that it was, again, based on me. So if I wasn't able to be there, which I was not, I was there for every meeting and every training, I should stress that. But again, when I left the district before we made it to the second year of this plan, then there was no one there to continue the work. So as much as I wanted to depend on myself and only myself, I recognized that that was a huge flaw in the implementation. I should have had other people definitely involved in the training and in the data collection. A lot of the data collection measuring the effectiveness of the intervention did come anecdotally from the teachers. If we would have continued in this project, we would have done some videotaping and some more objective data collection that way. So we had more evidence because a lot of it, again, came from the teachers saying, I really like this. I'm seeing the benefits of this. But I would want it to be more substantial than that, more objective. I also, again, the structure was not consistent because other people throughout the district did not prioritize this as much as we did within the building. And I thought by going and seeking that permission and support initially would help with that, but it didn't. So what I would do if I were doing this again is I would get our schedule on paper to those people at the district level. I had it at the building level, but not at the district level. And I would say, these are the times I'm gonna need this people, and I need promises from you that I will get them during those times. That was one thing I did not do. And so because of that, I did not ensure prioritization across the board. So I ended up losing out on time that I could have had with those teachers. So. But again, overall, I did see quite a bit of effectiveness with those staff that were able to commit fully before the end of the school year. These are just some things that I would change if I were to do it again. So does anyone have any questions? Oh, no, you're telling me I have 5 minutes. I'm so glad you said that. We actually very deliberately did not have the principal or the counselor or anyone who was in a position of providing like the formal evaluation of that teacher collect any of the data. So that, and we prefaced it by saying any information that we collect, I should have said that. Thank you for asking that question, because we told them any data that we collect is between us. It's just between myself and you as a teacher, and we really focused on the reason for collecting it is not evaluative at all. And so we clarified that with them, and so that when we came together as a group, again, if we looked at anything, it was anonymous whole group data. So we made sure that the two were not connected. That's a good question. Yeah. when we sent out the initial email of like, congratulations, you're selected, I then went and sought her out personally and had an individual one-on-one conversation with her where I recognized the fact that during the initial training, she had asked for help. And I said, this is the help that I want to offer to you, that I want you to be a part of this. And I really played up the fact that I viewed her as a leader in the building and that she was clearly a leader, and that as the union rep, having her involved and her being able to speak to other staff about that would be huge. So I flattered her a lot. And it worked. I mean, it really did. Oh, yeah.
The coding system that you guys use
Mhm.
for measuring the interactions, is that something that you guys created, or was that something that you found?
I pulled it from our district walkthrough tool, but a lot of it was not digital at all. It was simply tally marks for the most part.
And is this the same thing that Dr. Scott was talking about, the interactions?
No, his was different.
Okay.
Yeah. His is way cooler than mine.
And that one, was that one something that you created, or was that?
Yeah. It's an Apple app.
Oh, really?
SCOA, SCOA. And SCOA, SCOA, it's an Apple, it goes on the iPad. I think it costs $2.99. We do not get that money, just for full disclosure. It allows you to modify it. It's set up already to code OTRs and positive statements and some other things. You can do other things with it, and then it'll email that directly to you or whoever you want it to go to. That's all I know about it.
And this is our contact information if you'd like to reach out to us. I'm a full-time doc student, so I kind of have time to respond to email. No, I can definitely get back to you guys. And then this is information about the upcoming PBIS conference in Miami. Of course. And then the last slide is just our evaluation for our session. And if anyone has any, are there any additional questions? Yeah.
Back to your email.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I'm like flying through. I'll go back to the evaluation page in a moment. We'll do this. Okay. There you go. Thank you all so much.